All right, secret security and Keycloak. And can you guess? Because one of these is very specific, the others are pretty general. And I'll explain why we specifically put Keycloak into this application. So you've probably seen this wonderful agenda slide, but what I'm going to cover with you is an overview of identity and secrets, especially for those of you who might be newer to auth and authentication and authorization, all of the four-letter acronyms that go with security. And then I'm going to talk about the importance of understanding the type of client you're working with, because Aspire can span different clients. And then we'll look at Aspire and Keycloak as an example. And again, Keycloak in this presentation will be an example. It can be swapped out, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But there's a reason we went with it that I'll get into. So let's start with secrets in general. And this is something that every application comes across. There's no getting away from secrets if you want to secure your application. And when we talk about secrets, we're really talking about a few different things. And we can go down the line to certificates and tokens and probably a million other words. But at the higher level, we're dealing with the identity of something that's interacting with our application. We want to authenticate that identity. We want to authorize it, and that's usually to some sort of resource. So that's the goal, if you will, for the application. Now, when we think about identity, the easy part about identity is a person, right? So we've worked on the applications that have people log in, and you have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, so many different profiles, etc. But where identity gets even more interesting is that a device can log in and request services, and even an application can. So identity is more than just an individual. So that actually makes it interesting too, because the two things we really want to do when we're securing our web application is, again, authenticate that the identity is valid, and then authorize to the correct resources. And the best parallel I could come up with in real life is when you, if you get pulled over, if you've seen someone get pulled over in a movie, maybe you haven't, the first thing they'll ask is license and registration. So your license is what authenticates your identity. And it does so because they can match how you appear to the image on the license. And then there's ways to make sure that that license hasn't been tampered with. Of course, just like, systems can be hacked, licenses can be hacked as well. But in general, this is the main form we use as we go about to authenticate our identity. What's interesting too is when you have a car, you have a piece of paper that comes with it that's your registration. And that registration authorizes you to all the privileges of an owner to that vehicle. And so when you hand over license and registration, the license authenticates who you are, and then they can match that identity on the license with the registration to authorize your use of the vehicle, and they know it's yours, and there's nothing funny going on. Well, if we look at the application, we'll have a lot of similar scenarios, but with different types of identities. So for example, if we have someone who hasn't logged into an application and it's a financial account, of course, that dashed line is no connection, right? We don't want them to be able to touch that account. The authenticated user, on the other hand, should be authorized to their account, but definitely not another account, right? And then the bank app itself probably needs to see all of the accounts. Maybe it's aggregating, moving data, doing the transfer, etc. And so all of these elements need some sort of security around them. And we're going to dive into that. So when we think about authentication for a human, we have a lot of different ways to authenticate. We've got facial recognition, fingerprint, smart card, phone app, and password. All of these are events that take place, though, with an actual human being, and then that validation performs the authentication. So we trust that only the person who claims to be Jeremy has Jeremy's password, for example. So I'm going to show you now how to add this to Aspire. But I'm going to use Keycloak as an example. And I wanted to talk about why Keycloak, because when you're securing your application, there's really, I think, three general ways to think about it and general, I guess, types of technologies to look at. So if you're just doing a one-off application, maybe it's just an internal application for a business. Maybe it's a website that you're setting up. Maybe it's a hobby site. There's no need for a lot of overhead with your authentication. You don't necessarily need a major service. And so for that, we invested time into providing ASP.NET Identity. That's what's in the box. And again, that's for standalone applications that don't need to necessarily interface with other applications or have complex identity requirements. There is ASP.NET Identity in the box. However, if you are looking for something like single sign-on, federated sign-on that goes across different applications that you manage, if you're authenticating web APIs, then you need something a little bit more. And a very common approach to this is to use a set of standards of OpenID Connect and OAuth, et cetera. So when we look at that, we need to go with something that can handle those more complex flows. And so solutions might be managed. So if you decide to go to the cloud, then you've got Microsoft Intra is a solution. And obviously, if you're going to Azure, it's a solution that makes a lot of sense, especially because of the managed identities and what those provide. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. You have Auth0, which is a very popular option, and there's other cloud-based options. So this isn't the comprehensive list, but these are the common ones I hear developers talk about. But there are also people who, for various reasons, need to have all of their authentication in-house. So they don't want to delegate it to the cloud. They want to actually own the software and infrastructure for that and take on all of those responsibilities as well. So when you're doing that on premise, there's other solutions. For example, a very popular one is the Duende Identity Server, which is a very, very robust set of capabilities, and their website is great as well if you're looking to learn more about authentication and authorization, security, and OIDC. Very good examples there. But Keycloak is another example, and I was surprised as a product manager on the ASP.NET team when we were looking at Auth. This was a popular option, and I believe the popularity is because it's a containerized option. So Keycloak runs in a container. It can be provisioned in a container. And so it makes it easier to provide a small developer setup when you're testing locally, for example, in the inner developer loop. But then you've got the ability to scale it out, and there's guidance to actually scale it out for production. And so we're going to take a look at that. And the other reason I like Keycloak is because it shows how powerful Aspire is with the extensibility model, because the extensions I'll be using were community provided extensions to bring Keycloak, which is not part of the core .NET ecosystem, into Aspire and make it a part of Aspire. So let's go ahead and jump into some code and see what it takes. Now, what I'm going to show you is a very interactive piece so that you can see all of the components. There is a template that provides an out of the box, and you can file new. It'll import test users and set up what's called a realm. So all of that is out of the box. We're going to do it a little bit differently so that you can see what's involved behind the scenes. So let me pop over to my project here, which you can see is just a plain vanilla Aspire project. And it just has one API, the Aspirations API. And this is an out-of-the-box minimal API that I'm showing you. So it's got the weather forecast code. It's not secured. And one of the reasons I wanted to start here is because this is where a lot of people start. They have an existing application, and they're adding auth to it. So they can't just use a template and spin up something new. So here you can see we have basically one resource, and that's our API. So if I go to the Keycloak website, there's a walkthrough for getting started with Docker. And so I'm going to follow that walkthrough. And basically, it involves launching the Docker container. But what's nice about the way this is set up is there are flags that you can pass to get customized containers with customized features. So there's a lot of flexibility and dials and buttons that you can push. So as this is pulling down, the other thing you'll notice is that at the very end of the call to Docker, I've said start dev. I'm basically doing a developer mode version of it so that I can easily program and interface and connect. There is a production version of it, and that is not going to have admin, for example, as the administrator, user, and password. So what we're going to do is go ahead and jump into that console. So this is my local Docker container that's running, and I'm just going to set it up for my application. So I'm going to really do three things. The first thing is I'm going to create what's called a realm. And a realm is like a tenant. It's a group of related applications. So it might be the realm of a line of business or really anything that encompasses a suite of clients that work together. And realms can be hierarchical, and I'm showing you just the very tip of the iceberg in these 30 minutes. I'm going to create a user so that I can log in and show the authentication. And this is going to be pretty straightforward. I'm going to break all the rules with a bad password and telling it I don't have to verify my email and I don't have to change my temporary password because I'm in development. I want low friction. I don't want to have to do those things every time. I want to get it connected, make sure it works the way it's supposed to, and move on from there. So I'm setting the super secret password, which, spoiler alert, you will be able to see momentarily, but that's okay. We'll talk about that. And so now that I've got user set up, there's one more identity I need to set up, and that's the identity of my application, which is a client. So I'm going to create a client and I'm going to call it Aspire Client because of the unique originality of the name. I spent quite a while trying to figure out what my realm and app names could be, as you can see with aspirations and aspire. And I'm going to pretty much keep the defaults, although I'm going to set up client authentication. And that's important. We'll talk a little bit about that. The reason why that's opt-in is because it requires a client secret. And we need to make sure we can keep secrets before we set that up. And I'll show you what that means. So now this is set up and we've got our container configured. So now I'm going into the Aspire host application and I'm using that community contributed component so that I can host the resource of the Keycloak asset. So I'm adding the package reference to the Keycloak, and this will give Aspire everything it needs to know how to interface with the Keycloak volume, to spin it up, and to interact with it. And I'll show you what that interaction looks like in a second when we move over to the API portion of the demo. So now by adding that reference, I've made Aspire aware, and you can do, package add, dotnet package, like whatever your preference is for adding a package. I just popped it right into the project header. And now we're going to go into the code and we're going to create two things. First thing is a reference to the Keycloak container itself. So this is going to give me access to all the resources and assets in that container that are exposed, specifically being able to post to that container and request things like tokens that I need to pass between applications. And I'm telling it with data volume so that it persists and I don't have to start fresh with everything every time I run the application. So this will actually mount it. And someone said it looks like the code view is frozen. Can someone just do a check? I'll keep going, but if I need to do something, let me pause. I think what we're just experiencing is maybe some bits are backed up in the pipeline, so we're going to let them flush out. And see, now everyone says it's working now, so that was perfect. So we added the data volume and we added the realm so that we can interface with the realm. And what's really cool is behind the scenes, when I do this with reference, really the main thing it's doing is setting some environment variables on that API application. So the API says I need to work with Keycloak. So it's going to open up that access and configure the settings that the API needs to be able to communicate with Keycloak. The other thing in Keycloak is when we configured the client for the application, it allows us to do this option called download adapter config. And this will give me all of the JSON I need to configure Keycloak. And what's nice is this format is what the adapter is written to consume, so I can drop it straight into my JSON file. Now, there is a client secret in there. I want to call that out and assure you that we will be addressing that secret momentarily. And again, if we get the screen back, let me know. Some people are saying frozen again. I think I'm typing too fast for this. Okay, so it's back. All right, so what I'm going to do is just name this Keycloak, and then I'm pasting the configuration that I pulled right out of the admin console. And so that is pasted in. Now we'll go into the code and take a look at what needs to change so that I can secure this application now that I have a provider that I can configure things like authentication and authorization. So I'm going to include two references. That's the authentication and the common services from Keycloak, and the package, the repo that comes from has all the documentation about all the different ways that you can configure that. And now we're going to change this application that had no security whatsoever to secure the weather forecast endpoint. And I'm going to keep it simple and just say you have to have a login. I'm not going to require a specific role, but all of that is possible. So I'm going to use the extension that was provided to me by the Keycloak adapter to configure the authentication. So that's going to be past the builder configuration, and it'll pull out that JSON that I just pasted. And right now what I'm getting is, you can't see it on another window, but it's saying that Keycloak authentication is deprecated. It's more specific. We're going to add Keycloak Web API authentication. And that's the sign of a mature API, right? It's already has deprecated methods. So we know it's been out there. We're going to do a couple things here, and this should probably have a dev check behind it. The audience piece I'm not going to go into right now because there's that could be a whole talk on how to further secure interactions with audience. The require HTTP metadata is, again, something for development that, because of the type of cert and everything I'm working with, I need to make sure it doesn't do validations that'll fail on the development machine. It gets secured differently in production, and you can use the same flags that you would normally use for your checks. So now we added authorization. That's just a built-in ASP.NET Core authorization. And we've configured the middleware. Now we've got to tell the application to use it. So we're going to use authentication, and it'll go back to the Keycloak authentication that I just added. We're going to tell it to use authorization. And then on the weather forecast, we're going to go ahead and tell it that, hey, you know what? If someone wants to use this weather forecast, require authorization. So those are the steps I've taken to secure my application. Now you can see I've got extra assets in my dashboard. I've got the Keycloak and I've got the aspirations realm that are both resources with logging that I can troubleshoot. I go to hit the weather forecast endpoint and I get my favorite three numbers, 4, 0, and 1, which means not authorized. So I'm going to take you to the command line because I don't have time to build an entire UI for this, but what I can do is show you what it looks like to log in. So the first thing I'm going to do is use curl, which is basically hitting the HTTP from my command line. I'm going to go to the same weather forecast just to show you that I'm getting the 401 unauthorized. Now what I'm going to do is make a post. Now keep in mind, in your environment, this post would happen behind the scenes on the server. So this is the user logging in, the server talking to Keycloak and redirecting them. But here I'm passing a username, a password, a client secret. I'm putting it all out in the open just for the sake of a demo. But again, remember on the server, that'll be behind the scenes. So there's a well-known endpoint that you post to, and this will basically take me down to the name of the realm. So I've got my Keycloak address, realms, aspirations. I tell it the protocol I'm interested in, and I'm using OpenID Connect, which is possibly the one of the most popular flows to use. And I'm asking it for a token. So give me a token so that I can access this API. This was an interactive web application, you'd probably go with cookies, which would be perfectly fine as well. But because I'm on the command line, I'm going to do this. It's given me a token, and it gives me two. It gives me an access token and a refresh token. So the refresh token is what I can trade in to get another access token when that token expires, because it has a lifetime that you can configure in the system. And sometimes you want a way to be able to re-authenticate a user without having to force them to log in again. And so that's what the refresh token does. Now, with that token that I just got back from Keycloak, I'm going to place that in the header, and I'm just using a bearer token here. And I'm going to make that same call to the weather forecast. Dun, dun, dun. And now I get back the actual list. So that is securing the application. So now let's talk about the one thing that I feel was a little bit of when I was doing it, leaking secrets all over the place, right? So we talked about how we authenticate a human. How does a machine or a device authenticate? Well, there are several ways. One way is managed identity, and this is my preferred way, I would assume preferred way. I'm not a security expert, but I'm going to assume most of the time if you can use managed identity, and this is something that, for example, if you're deployed to Azure, the Azure services already have encapsulation of security and know how to securely communicate with each other. So this is allowing that infrastructure to take over and you not having to deal with the secrets and the handshakes and the back and forth. Another very secure way is certificates. I think that's probably everyone's favorite thing to work with is X.509 certificates, public keys, private keys, and a lot of mathematics to prove how strong the encryption is. And then there's plain old secrets, which are the long streams of text and random numbers that we see in the past scattered throughout GitHub repos, but now there's a big effort, right, to pull those out. So who can keep their secrets? This is important. So one thing to think about as you look across your apps, your mobile, your desktop, your single page applications like Angular and React, secure edge device, web API server rendered web app. Well, the ones on the top can't keep a secret. So if you are storing something in your browser's source code, your JavaScript source code, for example, if you are storing, even if it's encrypted, storing something on your mobile phone, there's a way to get to it and there's a way to compromise it. On the other hand, the bottom set of clients are considered confidential because they're able to keep their secret. Obviously, if someone compromises the server, that's a different story. But the assumption is that the end user doesn't have access to the server, so it can securely store that. Now, even having said that, there are ways to further protect it, even if it's a confidential client. So I call this the hierarchy of secrets and ways to manage them. And I would say at the top of that is just don't use them. If you can get away with a certificate and something more robust and strong, absolutely go for that mechanism. If you do have to use it, you want to use something secure. And Key Vault is Azure's solution that is right out of the box for securely storing secrets. All you have to do is authenticate with Key Vault, and then everything else is managed through that. And Keycloak itself also has the concept of a vault. You can configure a container and create a vault to store your secrets. If you do have to store it on your server, store it encrypted. There's tools to help you do that. And then never store it unencrypted. And please don't hard code it in your code. And I'm not even sure if that's possible now if you're using GitHub, because it's pretty quick to catch these. So these are two examples of vaults. There's the Azure Key Vault with .NET Aspire, the aka.ms link. I'm just pausing here because I know some people want to grab the links right away. And there's the instructions for Keycloak's Vault. If you need to keep it secret locally, ASP.NET Core has command line ways to deal with that. All I have to do is initialize the secrets for my project, and then I set the secret. And if you notice, the Keycloak credential secret is the same hierarchy that it appears in the file. It's like the JSON property, so you can walk straight down, and it'll automatically take the encrypted secret and replace that value for that. The other way that is unique for Aspire and is very powerful is the concept of parameters. And so you can create secret parameters that are then available to other projects. And because Aspire knows that it's a secret, it will find the ways to encrypt and ensure these are secret. And for your local development experience, you can drop it into your app settings.json and maybe even keep that a secret too. And then that'll fan out. But in production, you would set it in the environment or use Key Vault or some other mechanism for that. So that is the wrap up for identity and security. Hopefully, what you've learned is, if you're not familiar with security, some of the general concepts behind identity, authorization, authentication. But the other thing is how Aspire really made it very straightforward and easy for me to take that community component, pull it in, and configure security. And if you're looking for a solution that's on premises, Keycloak's something to consider, but remember there are other options like Duende Identity Server. And then if you're going to a cloud, there's a whole other suite of those. And with that, I am going to tee it back to Pablo.
Jeremy, I have a question. What I want to hunt hard-coded, man? I want adventure. I have fun. Come on, hard-code is the way.
Hard-code is fun. I admit that, but it's
excellent.
Now the someone that I know by the name of Barry gets upset when that happens, and I don't like getting very upset.
By the way, folks, I want to thank you, Lena Lux, for the raid. Thank you so much, and welcome everyone to Aspire Dev Day, where you saw Jeremy talk about a little bit on Keycloak and so much security. I'm searching for questions, Jeremy, for you. By the way, folks, if you have any questions, put them down, and we want all the questions right now. Let's take a look. So a question that I saw a lot here is about which basically which library that you had, because they didn't have any people didn't take a look inside. What was the nugget that you added to that post?
Yeah, we're going to go back in time, and I'm going to rewind to that. And then that production magic dust stuff I saw happen earlier can probably happen again, and we'll pop it right up. Oh, wait, no, I did that in the video, and I'm not going to rewind the video. Yeah, I'll pop these out, though. I've got the application actually right here.
Okay, show to us, because it's a mystery.
That over.
People want to know.
What's
people
that?
demand the library. People demand, okay.
All right, so here's the hosting library.
Yeah, there
right
you go.
Here, Keycloak Auth Services are hosting, and all of them start. Yep, and all of them start with Keycloak Auth Services.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if we go over to the API side, then we've got, again, Keycloak Auth Services, Authentication, and Comment.
Mm-hmm. So congrats to Tom. You were right on the comments. It was Keycloak Auth Services something. It was actually of something. So, Jeremy, before we go, do you have any messages for us for .NET Aspire Dev Day? For the folks you have a lot of people watching right now.
A lot of people watching. The pressures is so much. I'm just going to tell you.
I mean, you've seen it.
I really don't have to add to it. I think we've seen today anything that I can share, which is that even myself, adopting Aspire, I've been learning very quickly, and I'm very amazed at the ways things fit together and make sense and are easy to learn. So if you haven't tried Aspire, if these talks and forget like what you just saw, the whole day has been amazing. If that doesn't convince you, then I don't know what will, because it's pretty flexible, but also give us your feedback. I've heard that before, and I agree. Give us your feedback. Tell us how to make it better. Let's create the best developer experience ever. Okay, I'm done.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for that.